Wow. To Bud Schulberg, we say thank you for causing the largest crowd we ever had at the Robert H. Jackson Center, certainly inside. We did have a few more folks for Chief Justice Rehnquist, but we couldn't get them in here. Bud Schulberg, thank you. This is a special day for us. We have a Hollywood icon who not only achieved much in his career as a novelist, an Oscar Award-winning screenwriter, but also wasn't very much involved in Nuremberg, where, of course, we here at the Robert Jackson Center hold near and dear. We're here at the Robert Jackson Center, which is, the purpose is to advance the legacy of Justice Jackson, and he felt one of his most important attributes was his time at the Nuremberg trial. We have, over the last few years, and we're only not even 3 years old, had an opportunity to bring folks who shared that experience with Justice Jackson in Nuremberg in order for us to more fully understand that mosaic, that important period of time in not only Justice Jackson's life, but also, as it's turning out, a very relevant time in our own life here in 2004 as we see things being played out in Iraq. Bud Schulberg once was quoted as saying, "A good crime novel has to be thoroughly researched unless the author knows his stuff from the inside." In developing On the Waterfront, which, by the way, we had a great time last night talking to him about, I spent more than 2 years first researching and then getting involved in the war in the New York harbor. I was fascinated that waterfront mobsters like Cockeye Dunn could commit over 30 murders that everybody down there seemed to know about while he continued to do business. Cockeye finally went to the chair, but his partner and so many others lived on unscathed. Any single murder pales by comparison with the agonizing millions of murders I was to, in a sense, serve witness to when OSS General William Donovan put me in charge of collecting and presenting motion picture evidence of war crimes against the surviving major Nazi war criminals. We used only captured cinema footage to make our case, titled The Nazi Plan, and it ran for 4 hours at the Nuremberg trials. As Bud Schulberg said, I had the unforgettable satisfaction of being able to sit near the defendant's box and watch Goering, Stryker, Gauleiter, Hans Frank of Poland watching visual proof of their unspeakable crimes. When the lights came on, Hans Frank had passed out cold. Even the affable curmudgeon Hermann Goering looked shaken. We were dealing not with one, but with 6 million murders. And the only mystery was how human beings could sink to that kind of bestiality. After that experience, murder mysteries read like comedies, which in a sense they are. Bud Schulberg. Today, through the graciousness of the folks at Lakeshore Savings and Loan, L.J. Stein Code, to them we thank you very much. We have an opportunity to revisit a piece of history which I think when you get done you'll see is very relevant to today. We're going to start this by showing a short movie, which the movie itself will introduce Bud Schulberg.
Hinter uns kommt Deutschland!
American airmen cavorted in the remains of the Nuremberg Stadium, where many of the most famous Nazi rallies had been held, decisions were being made by their superiors on how to deal with the war crimes of the Nazis.
Nuremberg was about 90% destroyed. The big courthouse building and jail were pretty well untouched, so they decided to have the war crimes trial there. Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill had all talked about what they were going to do with the leaders once we won. The Russians wanted to take them all out and shoot them. So did Churchill. They got the thing through to have a trial and set a precedent so we can try the leaders of a renegade group like the Nazis.
The United States opened the prosecution case at Nuremberg. It began with mountains of the Nazi leaders' own documents put into evidence to prove that they had violated count one of the indictment by joining in a conspiracy to wage wars of aggression throughout Europe. But while documents were vitally important to the prosecution's case, as you might imagine, they often made for a rather dull courtroom. Prosecutors soon decided to liven things up for their audience, both in the courtroom and around the world, by showing a documentary film.
There you are. The film came in late last night, and I was up until dawn watching it. Now, very few people have seen this film. Bob, you have got to enter this into evidence this morning.
What's the film?
You're not going to believe this.
May it please the tribunal, the United States now offers a film into evidence. It was compiled from motion pictures taken by Allied military photographers as their armies liberated areas into which concentration camps were located. Go.
The American prosecutors devised an innovative technique to prove the charge that the Nazis had conspired to wage an aggressive and illegal war. The Americans used the Nazis' own newsreel footage to show various defendants with Hitler and with each other as the Nazis' expansionist plans were explained to the party faithful.
Sixth Party Congress presented an excerpt from the official German film Triumph of the Will, 4/10, September 1934.
what were very trying times just a few months before. In late June, the stormtroopers were purged and their chief was murdered, Ernst Röhm, because Hitler had made a deal with the big businessmen in the army to purge the stormtroopers of the socialist-thinking people. After all, the big businessmen in the army were all right of center, and they certainly didn't want left-wing people running the state. Now we have a series of people being introduced. And now we have coming Alfred Rosenberg to make a speech. He's the Reichsleiter, or the Reich Director, and later Reich Minister for Eastern Territories. He's a kind of muddled philosopher. He was born in 1893 in Estonia, and he died at the Nuremberg trials. He was executed and charged with crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the common plan of conspiracy. The worst of them all, Julius Streicher, the Jew baiter, the Gauleiter of Upper Franconia, the editor of Der Stürmer, the horrible pornographic magazine. He was hanged at Nuremberg at age 61 after the war. Justifiably so. Dr. Robert Lai, we've seen him before, the head of the German Labor Front. He would have been convicted at Nuremberg, but he strangled himself with a sheet tied to his toilet while he was awaiting trial and the indictment in the cell. Head of the Labor Front, died at age 55. Dr. Hans Frank, a terribly pernicious, evil man, the Reich Minister of Justice, and then later the Governor General of Poland. He was charged with 2 crimes at Nuremberg, war crimes and crimes against humanity, sentenced to death and hanged on October 16, 1946. Particularly brutal rule over occupied Poland. His son has recently written a book about him, denouncing him as a terrible father and a horrible person. And it's an interesting book to read, called In the Shadow of the Reich. What we're going to be followed with after Hans Frank is the most gifted speaker in the Third Reich, and that is, coming up just now, Dr. Paul Joseph Goebbels, the only Nazi who had a PhD from the University of Heidelberg in history and in literature. He was the head of the Ministry of People, Enlightenment, and Propaganda, the Gauleiter of Berlin, later General Plenipotentiary for Total War, went down to defeat with Hitler, and at the last days in the bunker, poisoned his 6 children, and then he and his wife committed suicide and their bodies were burned. He was a true believer, a real fanatic, a very talented speaker, and when Hitler wouldn't come out to speak when they were losing the war, he was always there to the very end saying to them, "Our walls break, but our hearts will never break." Tremendous propagandist and terribly evil man, committed to all of the precepts of National Socialism.
You know, it's interesting to see the way people, way back, this is 50 years ago, and the way they have become an important part of our cultural life. And Bud Schulberg was the writer, Bud Schulberg, who wrote one of the great Hollywood novels, What Makes Sammy Run. Yeah. So it's interesting. In some ways, they were pretty rich on talent in that prosecution team, weren't they?
Oh, yeah, they had a lot of Hollywood people doing a fair amount of stuff.
Thank you very much, I'm really happy to be here today. It's my first visit to the Jackson Center, and I want to thank Greg Peterson for inviting me. It's really a thrill for me to be here. The way this started was about in June, when General Bill Donovan, who was the head of OSS, asked our commander, the great director John Ford, to send someone to represent our very sort of odd outfit, the Navy unit assigned to OSS, to discuss the coming war crime trials of the major Nazi leaders. People have asked me how I got into John Ford's outfit. John Ford was really a very eccentric Navy commander. He was getting ready. He called me in. I think I knew him slightly in Hollywood, where I was raised, and he was. He kind of liked my book, What Makes Sammy Run. It was sort of anti the moguls of Hollywood, and Ford, in his own way, was a kind of a rebel also. And I think for that reason, putting together this unusual outfit, he asked me. I had already applied to get in both the Marines and the Navy, and asked me if I would join this organization. And after a while, I got in. We had an office in Washington, D.C., in the agricultural building, and we were all in our Navy uniforms. And there was something ridiculous about it, because John Ford ran it as if it was a ship. And when we left the office, we would have to ask the officer of the day, "Permission to go ashore, sir." So, Ford was a brilliant man. There was a kind of sadistic nature about Ford. And the first time I walked in the office, I wasn't really very military, and I knew him in Hollywood, and I sort of said, "Hi, Jack, how are you?" or something. And he said, "You're speaking to your commanding officer. Come to attention and just look." And so I said, "Ensign Schulberg reporting for duty, sir." I went through all this. So the next time I went in there, a few days later, I came in and I said, "Ensign Schulberg reporting for duty, sir." And he said, "Oh, for God's sake, bud, sit down on the couch, let's talk." I never knew which I was, his friend from Hollywood or this lonely ensign. He sent me to Fort Scholar. Sorry to make this so long about how I got into this darn thing, but he sent me to Fort Scholar, a real naval training school. And it was sort of with glee that he said, "You're going to go up there. You never went through anything like this. I mean, they're going to kill you up there." So I did go up to Scholar and went through all the regular training of anybody else who was going in the regular Navy. And I came back and he called me and asked me how I liked it. And I think he was very disappointed when I said I really liked it. And again, this went on. Anyway, when the war ended, I had been in the OSS in Germany doing various various things that they asked us to do in the OSS, like we would help to prepare the cover stories for agents who were being dropped behind the lines. And it was quite imaginative, creative of them, because they would use a writer like me and others to help write the cover stories for the agents, which is very much like the same way that you would create a character in fiction, based it mostly on real people, but changing it just some. It was sort of familiar work for me. Anyway, I'd been doing things like that. And then came the day that Ford and his next in line, Ray Kellogg, asked me to go. Donovan asked there are about 12 different branches, all different kinds of branches of the OSS. Donovan said there's going to be a trial, and I want to ask each one of you what you think your department can do. And so I spoke up and said, well, maybe we could collect film photographs that could be used at the trial. And Bill Donovan said, he said, good, how soon do you think you can get that together? And I had no idea what I was getting into. And we first started getting all the Fox Movietone newsreels, which actually were German films with our American narrations. And we got so much of that film, we got really about 350,000 feet of it. I mean, we ran that in New York City day and night. And with our film editors, these were all very good film cutters from Hollywood. Bob Parrish, a wonderful guy, and Joe Ziegman, Bob Webb, all very good, very expert. And they kept cutting it down. And we got it down to about 65,000 feet, which is about like 6 feature-length films, I guess. Then, meanwhile, I asked the OSS if we could get any German newsreels actually still from Germany, and I was very pleased to find out that the OSS was secretly every week getting the actual Wochenschau, is that how you say it? The weekly German newsreel. And that was another enormous accumulation, which we then started looking at. We took that to London, and we're running that. Meanwhile, the council, our liaison with the Jackson, with the prosecution in Nuremberg was Jim Donovan. And Donovan was advising us as to what might be evidence and what might not be. At that time, we were sort of working in the dark because they were working so fast in Nuremberg. It was an amazing thing what Jackson and his staff did, because they were starting absolutely from scratch. There were indictments had not been drawn up yet, and we were trying to sort of read their minds as to what they might be asking, but we weren't sure. And then we moved on to took all our stuff with us to Paris. And meanwhile, I was getting more and more worried that I think the first trial was set for September 15, and this is now well into July, and while Donovan kept calling me, he was reassuring, I guess, Justice Jackson, that we were really working on this film, but Donovan was calling me every hour practically, when will you have it ready? And I said, Jesus, Jim, we haven't really, in a way, we haven't really begun. And then Donovan said, well, he dropped a bombshell on us and said, by the way, none of that what you did in New York, all the Fox movie tone, will be acceptable. They're being very strict about this. They don't want to say the film came from the United States, and the defense counsel will knock it out. They could say we tampered with the film. So it was almost like starting all over again. And I never had the heart to tell Jim Donovan that while they were announcing this, and I think reassuring Justice Jackson that we didn't know, in a way, we didn't know what the hell we were doing there up in Berlin. And, but we did start looking for film, German film. We got two, I asked for as many German prisoners as possible who were involved in film could be sent to me. And two very valuable people turned up, one by the name of Walter Rode, and the other, Kurt von Mollow. They told me for the first time they had been film editors for the SS. And we learned from them that the SS had its own film unit, and that they made what they call reports. We would call it atrocities, but it was work that they were very proud of. Killing all these Jews and doing all this was sort of all, from their point of view, purifying, cleansing Germany, and eventually all of Europe. And they told me that these films, they were often two real films, would be shown at the homes of the Nazi leaders, Goebbels and Himmler, Hitler, and the rest of them, and they called them desserts because they showed them as a sort of entertainment after dinner. We thought we've got to find some of this film, and Walter Rode told us that there was a lot of film hidden in a quarry mine shaft. I think it was in the town of Grossleben, about 30 miles east of Berlin. So we got in some jeeps and raced over there. We went through a long tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel was an incredible, unbelievable sight. There were acres, like football fields and fields of film burning. Cans smoldering. They had burned the whole, it must have been millions of feet, burned the whole damn thing. And we were heartsick. And we did pick up, like, here and there, we picked up strips that were half destroyed. I remember one in particular showing SS men pulling women, middle-class women, down steps by their feet, and the dresses over their heads, and it's just unbelievable, and filming all that. But we never got really what we hoped to, because it was destroyed. The same thing happened again a little bit later. He told us that there was another hidden cache of films at Ruddersdorf, another small town way out of Berlin. We went there, And it was sort of a tunnel into a mountainside. And I'll be damned if it was the same thing again. Tons and tons of film, all burning, destroyed. We lost them. Can't tell you what, in a way, history and what we lost in the destruction of that. It's an indescribable archive. We put together bits and pieces where we could, and meanwhile, the Russians were not being very cooperative. Most of this would be in the Russian zone. Russians were not being very helpful. They kept very much to themselves, and they weren't team players with us at all. It's part of being allies and on the tribunal and prosecution of the coming trial. So we decided to, and the colonel was very difficult. We decided to give we had the terrific house in Wannsee, by the way. We had a house that we told them, one trouble with the OSS is that they teach you to be master liars. It's part of undercover work. We told them that we needed a house for General Donovan, and we got a mansion in Wannsee. In fact, we got two, one where we lived, and the other where we made into a cutting rooms and projection rooms and showed the films. And so we worked out of there, and we decided that we would try to soften up the Russians by giving a huge party for them. And so we did it. We invited the colonel and his staff. We had a lieutenant commander who didn't know anything about the Nazis really. He was a playboy with a bracelet that said "Too stinky from Doris." That was Doris Duke. And in some ways he wasn't very helpful, but in other ways he was very helpful, because for one thing he knew how to set up a party, and so we had all kinds of liquor, champagne. We had some whack women who we thought might be socially could help as hostesses, and we were all set. We had elaborate servants. I never lived that well again, I tell you. We had this whole staff, and then we waited. I think we invited them like 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, 10:30. No Russians, and finally they come in about 10:30. The most raucous bunch, and much larger contingent than we expected. And they start with drinking vodka toasts, and we toast to President Roosevelt, and we toast to Stalin, and we toast to the glorious victory, and we toast to one thing every. And then sat down. They drank the Russian officers drank an entire case of our best Cabernet wine. I've never seen any people drink like this. And then about 1 o'clock in the morning, we had found some amazing film in a basement. We found about 30 cans shortly before then, and we didn't know what it was. We started to run it, and it was a really scary film. It was the trial of every one of the defendants of the July 26 plot against Hitler. And it is one of the scariest movies. You see the Field Marshal von Slavin, who had been a very high up commanding officer in the Wehrmacht, but had been part of the plot. And they had taken off his uniform, and they gave him pants that were too big for him without a belt. And the Judge Freisler screamed at him. And every time von Slavin was sort of enforced to raise his hand, his pants would start to fall down. And they photographed all of this. It's all there. There was a worker through all those defendants. There was a Catholic priest, Father Wheeler, who at first is on trial in his cassock, and Freisler is screaming at him because apparently this Count Schwerin, he came to him as part of his confessing and asked him if he thought it was a mortal sin to dispose of someone who was endangering the life of his country and the world, something like that. He didn't name Adolf, and some apparently Father World thought that it might not be a sin, and later on, the Count had confessed this under terrible duress about the priest. In the next shot, I won't go into this whole movie because it went on 65 reels. They photographed every word of this long trial. In the next shot, you see the same Catholic priest, no longer in his cassock, just in plain, bedraggled clothes, looking like a poor soul. And the Judge Freisler would scream like Hitler, and scream at each one of them, "You Schweinhund," and just scream at them. There's one time when screaming at that Count, who had come from a very high family, had been an early supporter of Hitler, and then thought that we got to get rid of him. At one point in that movie, Freisler screams at him for 1,000 feet of film. The judge is just calling him every name in the German. Anyway, try to make this short. We then, about 1 o'clock in the morning, we took the colonel and his bunch, who are now pretty plastered, over to see our July 20th film. And they were very impressed. And they asked if we could make a copy for them and so on. And that's next day they let me, with a Soviet officer, go about 30 miles deeper into the Russian zone than they said any American had been. And we went there. And again we found film that had been destroyed, and the local German people blamed it on the Russian drunken soldiers came in with torches and they did it, but the Russians said that's nonsense. We couldn't possibly. They did it, and anyway, we still didn't have anything. And in spite of letting me go in that far, they weren't all that helpful. And then I asked that colonel, is there anybody else I can talk to? And he sort of reluctantly said, well, there's the head of the archives, you can talk to him. And then now I go to him. I never forget him. Major Avenarius. And Avenarius is suspicious of me. And he said, I don't understand this. Why is a young naval officer coming here into Soviet-controlled part of Germany? I just don't understand what you're doing. And why are you here? So I said, well, it's a long story, Major, but we're part of the Commander John Ford's. I got about that far, and he said, John Ford? In one word, he said, John Ford? He said, you know John Ford? And I said, God, we work, he's our boss. Well, he says, I have written 2 books about John Ford. It turns out that this man is the biggest expert on John Ford in the world. He wants to know movie by movie by movie, every single one. He got so excited. He said, remember that shot on young Abe Lincoln when Henry Ford had his foot up on the desk and the shooting? You remember the angle? I tell you, it was extraordinary. And then, now he says, now he's our friend. He'd really do anything for us. He said, come on. He's got all the negatives. He's got the negatives of films that we've been looking for. And he actually said, like, bring a truck. You can take anything you want. So that was a huge breakthrough. Meanwhile, it's getting closer and closer to the trial, and we're having a nervous wreck. Thank God it was postponed from September to October 15, and that gave us a little time, but not much. And any moment I was shaking that we're going to have to tell Jim Donovan, we just can't do this. We just won't have it ready. And especially as we got into the master plan, the horrors of the atrocity was in a way easier. They just had to gather and decide how much of it to use. They could have run that all day. And but the master plan was much more complicated, much more legalistic, as we had to run not only the triumph of the will, but all the Partei Day, their own newsreels, statements. Some of the statements were amazing. I mean, Goering is quoted as saying, we have to clean all of Germany and finally all of Europe with an iron brush. And Hans Frank says something like the whole concept of justice is the will of Adolf Hitler. There were full of statements that were very, very, very self-incriminating. But each time we had to run everything by Jim Donovan and lawyers on Justice Jackson's staff. We worked quite closely with Ben Kaplan, and they were very tough on us. They wanted to know for sure what the origin of practically every foot of this film was, because they were very fearful. And Justice Jackson, I only met him, shook hands, although I wasn't high enough in any way to actually interact with Justice Jackson. But the message was that this was the first time that film was ever going to be used, and we better be damn sure we had it legally right, that there were no tricks in it, nothing that the defense lawyers could object to. And so we ran everything by Jim Donovan, and in terms, a lot of it by Ben Kaplan, judging it for Justice Jackson. It's almost too long a story to tell at one standing. We got a reprieve, thank God we did, because I was saying up in Berlin, we'll never make October 15th. We just won't have it ready. And what are we going to tell them? They'll court-martial us. We're going to be in trouble. So thank God that then they postponed the trial one more month. And that really gave us a life-saving period. I should go back one step or two and say that The Triumph of the Will was maybe the most powerful propaganda film ever made to this day. It was made by Leni Riefenstahl, who had been a famous movie star, and then a director, and very close, very, very close to Adolf Hitler. It was so close that she didn't have to go through Goebbels and the propaganda office. She could walk right into Adolf's office of his home and get what she wanted, money for the films, personnel, whatever. And so, especially with the pushing I was getting from Jim Donovan and Jackson's staff in Nuremberg, he said everything has to be sort of clearly identified. Like even the parts of the Triumph of the Will that we were using, you better have whoever made it, like Leni Riefenstahl, identify. Yes, she made it. So then we decided we had to find Leni, and the OSS and the Army intelligence tracked her down, and so I went to see her. I tried to shorten this too, but I went to see her. She was living in a really nice chalet on a lake somewhere outside of Munich in Bavaria, and I was in my uniform. I had only a weapons carrier, an open weapons carrier, and I had a corporal, an army corporal, that we had borrowed as a driver. I went in to see her, and they were very startled to see any American officer at the door. And then, but she said to come in, and I sat down with her on a couch. She was about 40 then, a very good-looking woman, and sat down, and then she started a whole song and dance that she's been saying from 1945 until she died last year. She was never a Nazi. She was never for the Nazis. She was a pure documentary filmmaker. And making those films, she also made not only that one, but shorter ones. She did several party. A number of other. But she said these were just pure art. I was only interested in art. And then she said, when I went to Hollywood in 1938, my fellow film artists in Hollywood, they loved me there. They gave me a huge reception. She told me she just was looking at a young naval officer, and she didn't know that I came from Hollywood. That was my hometown, and that when Leni had come out there, ever so many of the invited guests to Max Sennett's dinner party for her, all the liberals, Melvin Douglas and Freddie March and Dorothy Parker and the whole, each one invited was given a list of 10 to phone guests not to show up. And so the party was a miserable failure in which only the only the Victor McLaughlins and the Hollywood fascists, only they really showed up. She's telling me who helped us sabotage her own party. She was telling me how popular she was there. So that's about all I could take. So at that moment, I reached in my pocket and I said, well, Ms. Riefenstahl, I'm very sorry, but I have this warrant for you. It was burning a hole in my pocket while she was talking. And I said, I've got this warrant for you to take you to Nuremberg. At which she screamed, and she screamed, and she called out her name. She was like, Pussy, Pussy, they're arresting me. And this little man ran out. I don't know where he came from. He ran out, and she said, they're taking me away. And she was hysterical. And I tried to explain to her that she was not being arrested as she wasn't exactly a major war criminal, but that she would be useful as a material witness. And so I wish we had a picture of her, but on this open weapons carrier goes the great Lenny Riefenstahl and the driver and me, and I drive her to Nuremberg, and we put her in that guest house where all the many different kinds of witnesses were held, and she was never very happy about it, but helpful in identifying. They were shocked in the first. You can see them in the first row of the Nazi Party, nodding in agreement when Hitler is making a very strong statement about what they plan to do and so forth. So she was helpful, and we used that. And anyway, we finally somehow got the 4 hours together, and then 1 hour of Atrocity film. And on the first day of the trial, I was really very privileged to be able. I actually heard Justice Jackson make his opening address at the trial, and it's something that it really should be heard over and over again and read now, and it's more relevant than ever in the light of what's been happening of the dictators around the world, whether it's in what was the old what was Serbia and Iraq, about holding the idea of holding a trial that will not be what the Russians want to just line them up and shoot them like, and even the British were for more, I think, of a military tribunal, the sort of thing what we had done in Japan. It was Jackson who stood up for a genuine, legitimate trial that would truly give the defendants a chance to defend themselves with the most competent counsel that they could gather in their own defense. And he did have this strong feeling that we're not doing this for just now. It's not just to shoot these bastards like the Russians wanted to do, but that we were setting a precedent for all time. Just in closing, when he spoke that day, he mentioned the evidence that he felt would make their case conclusive, not only with documents, but live witnesses, and also he said you will be seeing film and photographs put into evidence, and I can't tell you what a feeling it gave me that day. It was the first trial ever to use film, and it was probably the most important trial maybe of all time. And so so we went on. We ran the Atrocity film first, and that day, I got there as early as I could, and the Russian table was the closest one to the dock where the prisoners were, so I could watch them as closely as possible and get their reaction. I won't go into all of it, but I could see all the body language and the facial silent facial language. I could see the dark look on Stryker's face. I could see all the military men. They almost physically turned away, as if this is not us. And you could see also the diplomats, Papen, Neurath, and so forth, had a sort of removed look, also feeling that this was not them either. And you could see who was really shook by it, because the film was just a moment that you saw. That kind of film of those bodies, we could have run all day into the night, around the clock. It drove us all crazy doing it. We were watching that anyway. Marshal he was a very interesting, complex man, and you could almost see his mind spinning as to how he was going to defend himself. And Hans Frank was the guy leader for Poland. We also, just aside from all the American film that our guys shot as they went in the different concentration camps, aside from that, we did find one film that the Germans made on Warsaw. And someone asked me, I think a member of the press, what was almost like the most horrifying moment of all the horrifying moments. And I said, I think it may be in that German film on Warsaw. They show the uprising, they show the killings, they show the shooting, and then they show the dishes where the poor emaciated bodies are being buried. And they have a cameraman, a German cameraman, right down deep in the pit, shooting up as these emaciated, naked bodies are being thrown past them. They're actually doing this is not exposing from the other side. This is them photographing what they were doing, including the most unbelievable. I mean, women with infants were being thrown down past the camera, and the thought of that guy down there just doing this as his job was something that is hard to ever erase from your mind. And so I know I've gone on maybe a bit too long, but it's a subject that has stayed with me all my life. And that I guess Greg Peterson asked me what the highlights of my life have been. And even though one may seem as trivial as seeing Muhammad Ali knock out George Foreman in Zaire, I really think that this experience is something I really feel that it was awfully lucky for me to have first John Ford pick me for it, and then for Donovan, and then for the Justice Jackson's staff to have the vision to use film, in a way that anybody looking at could not deny. And that's why when the lights came on, Hans Frank, the Gauleiter for Poland, a powerful man, his head was on the table, and he had absolutely passed out. He was unconscious. I think as he was watching that, and knowing that we were all watching it, I really think he could see himself on the gallows, and just couldn't face it. And so I want to thank you, Greg, for inviting me here. I think that perpetuating the legacy of Justice Robert Jackson is a tremendous thing that you're doing. It's so important that people, it's so easy for a new young generation, so many years removed from that experience, to, in a sense, feel it never happened. There are even some people around the world who claim it's just a Jewish plot to invent the Holocaust, and it never happened. And here we know that it did, and I think we owe a great debt to Justice Jackson. He really persevered for this. He fought for it. He fought for it against really the Allies, who were very reluctant to go along with a prolonged, carefully planned, totally legitimate legal trial. And so I want to thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Bud. And this has been very special for us, and I also would be remiss if I didn't point out a couple of folks who made some special efforts to get here. Bud Schulberg's son, Ben, and Sandra Schulberg, niece of Bud Schulberg, came all the way from Los Angeles here on her way to Berlin to show a very special movie which she's produced on her father, Bud's brother, Stuart, on the Marshal Plan, which is going to be shown at the Berlin Film Festival next week. So, Sandra, thank you for coming.